Hi there, it's Marcus here. I'm sitting with Caitlin Noakes, or should I say Dr. Caitlin Noakes. And Caitlin was at the Oceania Futures event with me, and she ran the Ouija Futures session, which was very popular. And I sort of came up with this plot with Amanda Reeves, who I interviewed a week or two ago, to talk to Amanda, and then to Claire, and then to Caitlin, in that order, to see how the thinking around embodied experiential futures plays out. And Caitlin's excellent to interview in this regard because her Ouija Futures is kind of like a bridge kind of activity where individuals are asked to think about a great persona of some kind who influences them. You might want to correct me in all of this, Caitlin. Could be Karl Marx, but it could also be a tree or a waterfall. It doesn't have to be a human persona. And then we take that kind of questioning into an activity where we're asked, in this particular occasion, to think about, how do we make just futures for future generations and so on. And then we just let the whole thing unravel. So Caitlin was, as I said, at Oceania with me. She ran that session, but she also participated in the Museum of Futures with Claire and Amanda at the helm. And basically we're here to reflect on all of that. Where does it take Caitlin? What kind of thinking is involved for her in this embodied and also quite abstract in some ways domain? Caitlin, I want to introduce though. I mean, I've known Caitlin for a long time. She actually works with me in teaching various history subjects and humanities subjects and so on at the University of the Sunshine Coast. She's recently got her PhD, which is in a very lovely creative sort of space. And you might want to tell us a little bit about that, Caitlin. But yeah, Caitlin, how do you introduce yourself? I mean, I can sort of rabbit on about you, and I've sort of spooked you in a number of different contexts now. But when you meet someone, let's say an academic, of course, not somebody that doesn't really understand the university world. But let's say you meet someone who's an academic. What do you say to them?
Mm. I say, hi, I'm Caitlin, or if I want to be formal, Dr. Caitlin Noakes.
Yeah.
Um, I teach at the University of the Sunshine Coast in Queensland, Australia. And I've taught into a variety of courses across the arts, humanities, and social sciences. But specifically, my training, my PhD, was in creative writing research. And what I was interested in was the kind of epistemologies and ontologies informing creative writing research. Because in that space, there's a lot of really excellent work, but not always a great deal of theorizing around epistemologies, ontologies, methodologies. So I was really curious to know what people were doing, what kind of theoretical frameworks were informing them.
Yep. Yep. No, and oh, you did really well. You actually got an award for that PhD, so that's also worth acknowledging. So, yeah, so Caitlin, I'm always admiring of your ability to state things succinctly, to nail things, and also when we're enmeshed in these kind of big activities, you've got this kind of radar ability to pick up all sorts of things, and then you remember them and you reflect them back at us. And that's what I kind of like. I'm interested in hearing some of that from you now. So here we were in Oceania. We had 80 people, flowing around doing all sorts of stuff. And what was interesting about that experience was that much of it was really about wayfinding and the kind of expanded human sensory and perceptual sort of spectra that we bring to that kind of thing. Tell us what you got out of that. What did you notice, as an overarching takeaway before we go and look closely at your Ouija futures?
I think through so many of the sessions, there was challenges mounted to the ways that we think, primarily more than what we're thinking. So we're so used to, in our particular time and place, our historical and cultural context of thinking in these very strictly logical, rational, cerebral ways.
Mm. Yeah.
And so many of the sessions were about things like, yeah, as you say, wayfinding, which is about jumping in without a plan, without
Mm.
that logic, and figuring it out as you go,
Mm.
or building the ship as you sail it, I think was a great metaphor I heard.
The ship of Theseus, wasn't it? That was fantastic. Yep.
And yeah, a lot of stuff around embodied thinking too. And actually, I designed my first day all around doing body stuff. So I went to Samantha Starshine's session on embodied ethnography,
Yep.
for example. And of course, I enjoyed the mini museum of the futures where we got to use our hands to think, making little artworks. And I really enjoyed that because I don't think of myself as being a very embodied person. Like I'm very thoroughly, I suppose I've been conditioned into being very cerebral and intellectual in my studies and my work. And that's kind of how I move through life. I'm not very in touch with my body. I'm very clumsy. I knock things over all the time. I don't know where I am in space. So I was interested in expanding that way of thinking, of getting into sensefulness rather than meaningfulness, as we might say.
Mm. Yeah.
Pulling that from Mercado de Oliveira.
Yes, where we world the world, not word the world. And so worlding. And yeah, of course, I guess this particular series of interviews with you and Amanda and Claire falls within my work on futures feeling as opposed to futures thinking, which I think is a really important extension of that. We do need to think futures. We need to be all over, a set of futures tools and so on. But the tools themselves can be regarded as saleable items. I can go in and do a futures triangle with these people and they'll pay me X amount of money. So in a consultant's world, there is that. But of course, good consultants are always interested in the bigger picture. And I think your work as an educator and mine also seeks to build bridges in these spaces. So one of the things that I noticed with you is you can take an abstract idea and you can create a game out of it. You were just telling me about one just before we turned this hit record, right? Where you're going to look at international relations. Can you briefly tell us what might happen this coming week when you enter the fray?
Oh yeah. Hopefully none of my students watch this and get spoiled. But yeah, I've got a unit on international relations with my students. And the material they're reading to prepare for class talks about the importance of praxis,
Yeah.
right? Not just playing with theory, but putting it into practice. And given that's the kind of background, and there's a theory focus in the course, and the reading has a whole bunch of different theoretical positions on international relations in it, in particular globalization. I thought, well, we better try to put this theory into practice. We better do some praxis. So I'm going to pose them an international crisis.
Yeah.
I'm thinking we're going to do something that isn't immediate, so they can be a bit more imaginative. So I'm thinking a potential invasion of Taiwan by China. And then I'll assign everyone in the group a different role. So they'll all be different countries like China, the US, Australia, India, Japan.
Yeah.
And I'm also going to make someone Saudi Aramco, whose revenue rivals the GDPs of countries like Norway and Venezuela, right?
Mm-hmm.
So we've got to think about those plays in international relations too. And each group, as well as a country or a corporation, is going to get a theoretical position to work from, a way of viewing the world.
Okay.
And once they have their role and their theory, they're going to decide how they're going to respond to this emergent crisis.
Yep.
In a best case scenario, I'll get them doing some like wheeling and dealing, a bit of diplomacy, trying to make alliances in the room. So yeah, hopefully it'll be fun.
Yep. So really you're gaming it. And that's That's really important, and I'm sure it will trigger a whole bunch of reflection, but also, you know, some level of excitement among students. It's fun to do that. So that's terrific, and that's the sort of thing that you're very good at. So tell us about bringing experiential futures thinking to futures. You know, how are you? You've got this great game. Tell us a little bit about that, so people who are listening have an understanding, and then we can sort of fold back in on the kind of connections that you and Amanda and Claire all share.
Yeah, so my workshop that I ran at Oceania was Ouija Futures, subtitled Learning to Live with Ghosts. Um, and it started with theory, actually. It started with me rereading Jacques Derrida's Spectres of Marx, which has more futures thinking in it than I recall from the last time I read it. And of course, he's specifically talking about what is the future of Marxism, and he's writing in, 1993, right after the collapse
Yeah,
of the
the
USSR.
USSR. Yeah.
Um, and I was kind of thinking, oh, okay, so what kind of role might things like specters play in our futures thinking? So specters are, for Derrida, they're these elements of the past, people, but also events, beings, or anything that you can attribute to memory. How do these shape what we're doing in the future? And for Derrida, he talks about what he calls critical inheritance, which I think actually aligns really well with your creative traditionalism, right? The ability to pass what we inherit from the
Yep.
past, pick out what works to carry forward, figure out what to abandon, and also figuring out how to transform what we take from the past so that we have a better future. Now, given Derrida is thinking about how the past relates to futures through the metaphor of the ghosts, it just felt really easy and natural to be like, all right, let's make some Ouija boards.
You got
And
one there? Can you wave it at us?
yeah, oh, I don't have one with me right now. I should have brought it.
No, that's okay. I'll put a photograph or two from the session up at the end of this so that people can see it. Yeah.
Oh, that would be awesome. And I did have fun making them. I kind of like designed a board in Canva and made some resin planchets using silicon molds and stuff. But what appealed to me a lot about Ouija boards wasn't just the way it taps into Derrida's metaphor of the ghosts we carry from the past into futures, but Ouija boards also involve a kind of embodied thinking. The way Ouija boards are thought to work is that, unless you believe they are contacting ghosts, and some people do, the current scientific understanding of Ouija boards is that we're always making these very minute involuntary movements. And when sitters or participants around a Ouija board place their fingers on the planchette, they make these tiny movements that they're not aware of, and it moves the planchette. And so it kind of gives the illusion that the planchette is moving itself. And I was kind of thinking through that, when we talk about embodied thinking, it's like, okay, well, what does the body know perhaps that I'm not aware of, right? What kind of thinking is happening below the level of my consciousness that might be expressed in movement?
Yep.
So the Ouija planchette is, it's intended to be a way to tap into that. But the other nice thing about Ouija boards too is that you always have multiple people at a Ouija board. So that embodied thinking, it's not just individual thinking.
That's what I like, yes.
Yeah, it's also collective thinking. So it's people pooling their bodily knowledge together and doing a kind of collective thinking around the futures.
Yeah, so that was, and that's really important, I think, that it is not an individual sitting down with a set of tarot cards and doing a cast just for themselves, but you've actually got people physically engaging collectively in something. And it was fun to watch. One, I've done it a couple of times with you because you've run it a few times. So one, I was involved, and the planchette does move around somewhat randomly. It didn't sort of say hello, Marcus, or or anything. There was no real coherence there, but it did move. And then when I was the next session, I was a note taker, so I didn't actually play. So I was watching and I was taking note, X, P, T, and then everybody was trying to work it out. What's important is that you provide a context. So you ask a question about justice, then you ask the question about people, and now you take people through a little meditation. Now that's important, because a bit of meditation can be for some people a little confronting, but you do it well. You say you can keep your eyes open if you want to, all that sort of stuff. And basically you're asking us to identify a significant spirit other, whether it be marks, as I said before, or a tree or a rock, river, anything. So all of that happens as you set up the context. And of course, you also give us a little lesson on what the Ouija board is. You got a lovely clip from some 1955 movie or whatever it was. The overall takeaway, though, was something that sort of went beyond all of that. When I've heard people talking about it, they were talking about their feelings. And that's really important because that's that sublinguistic or subcognitive or unconscious, whatever we want to call it, element. Have you got thoughts about that, Caitlin?
I do. And it was something that occurred to me when I was listening to Amanda's interview with you, which is the relationship between thinking, feeling, and the body. So back in the late 19th century, you've got William James, who's one of the kind of pioneers of modern psychology. And he theorized that the order in which we become cognizant of emotions is that first our body reacts, and then we identify from that reaction a feeling, and then our thinking around that feeling.
Yeah.
So I think there's a quote from him which goes something like, first we cry and then we are sad. First we smile and then we are happy.
Oh,
All right.
I like
And
that.
yeah. And just this week too, I was listening to an interview on the Ezra Klein show with an expert in consciousness. I can't remember his name, but I'll see if I can find it and send it through to you for context. But he was talking about how so often we think of consciousness as being in the brain, and the body is just kind of like a meat suit that the brain pilots. And he takes the opposite point of view, which is that our body is what we are, and the brain exists to make the body run.
Mm.
And you can kind of see, I think it's in, I think it might be in Sapiens by Yuval
Yeah.
Harari, where he
Yeah.
talks about the sea slug that uses a brain to find a location where it's safe. And then once it's found a location, it eats its own brain because it doesn't need it anymore and it's so energy dense. Right?
Mm.
So this fellow on the Ezra Klein show, he was saying like, okay, like our consciousness, our thinking, our feeling, this all really has to do with our bodies. And our brain just kind of processes what our bodies are doing and serves
Yeah.
our bodies and keeps them alive.
Mm.
So when we talk about like the body thinking, feeling, I think it's kind of like in the order that James says. Like first we have this sensory experience, and then we attribute to that experience a feeling, and then we attribute to that
Mm.
feeling a particular cognitive framework, right? Some
Yep.
thoughts or a story. So I think, say in Ouija futures, I do lead in with a bit of theory and a bit of meditation,
Yep.
but I included the meditation specifically because firstly I knew I was opening with theory and I was going to chuck some French post-structuralism at people to give context for why I was doing what I was doing. And that's a lot. That's very cerebral. So it's like, okay, put a bookmark in that. And then we'll do a meditation to come out of our heads into our bodies a bit more. And then when we launch into the Ouija session, we're kind of more tapped into our bodies,
Yep.
which, according to James, and this awesome interviewee whose name I can't remember, that's where it all starts, is with the body.
Yeah, that's beautiful. And it's my experience too. So I'm totally on board with that. And the interesting thing is that you're drawing on William James reminds me very much of the work of the historian, historical philosopher, and psychologist who's living now, Ilko Runia, whose work I've used, and I know you've come across it because I keep waving it at people. And he says, look, often human beings do something and then we create the narrative. So his argument is that we commit history, that we have a French Revolution. We weren't thinking, oh, we're going to have a French Revolution tomorrow. Let's get ready. It was no, it just suddenly explodes. And then people look back on it and say, what the hell happened? And that's the job of historians, you know. So that's one part of it, to supply a reverse narrative, or to look back over your shoulder and supply a narrative. It's a bit like the indigenous and the Maori, to walk backwards into the future. It's also like Walter Benjamin's Angel of History, who's got his back to the future and everything from the past is blowing at him like a tornado and so on. So we've got those sorts of metaphors. Before I ask another question, there's a sub-question here, which is, so here it is, we've got the body acting. I smile and then I feel happy. I cry and then I feel sad. How do you see this as pertaining to the future, as particularly future's feeling?
Yeah, I was just thinking about that as you were talking,
You
actually.
dug a hole for yourself, did you,
I
Bob?
know, yeah. No, no. It's as Runia says, you have this situation where we commit history and then afterwards we narrativize it.
Yeah,
So I think I'm thinking that we might be committing the future too, right?
exactly. Thank you. Yeah,
Um,
I do.
so if we talk about futures thinking, futures feeling, futures sensing,
Mm.
um, it is the futures sensing and feeling which is coming first, and the futures thinking is what happens afterwards, right? To explain the feeling and
Mm.
sensing.
Yep.
So thinking in a sense is thinking is almost retrospective, right?
Yeah.
So thinking faces the past.
Yeah.
Maybe
Exactly.
our bodies are what faces futures.
I like that. So yeah, for me, you know, my work on the future sense. So I've got memory and then foresight. Memory is the data set, and of course, memory is mine, but it's also like with the Ouija collective. You've got a group of people, and of course, it's cultural, which means you've got a massive potential data set from which you can draw. So Derrida, you called it critical inheritance, and I talk about creative traditionalism. Very much the same thing. It's where you actually select elements of that's in the data set, which, you know, the historical, or I would say the cultural, and we can take it. So we've got anti-Semitism, colonialism, racism. We've got all these homophobia. We've got all these horrible parts of culture, which we can say, no, well, that doesn't serve us in the future. But what we have is also community, empathy. We have a whole bunch of other elements in culture that I can draw on, imagination and so on. So that's really important. So when we start thinking and feeling futures, we are always in a dialogical sort of folded space. You know that I've used that sort of symbol. I have it tattooed on my arm. You know, I've used that. Do you see it that way, or do you have some other way of relating to that folded nature of time?
Mm. Yeah, I'm definitely thinking about time as folded.
Hmm.
And actually, Derrida in Spectres of Marx talks a bit about it. He talks about how um, ghosts seem to be located in the past, right? They're the things that we get from the past. But the nature of a haunting is that it's
Yeah.
the threats or the promise that something from the past will return in the futures, right?
Yeah.
So ghosts are located in our pasts and in our futures, right? So they are disjoining the present, the
Mm,
way that Derrida expresses it. So they're disorganizing linear time. And inheritance is like that too, because when we inherit something, it's not like when you buy something and you have to pay the person you get it from.
yeah. Mm,
Inheritances don't generate debts to the
yeah.
people we get them from, but they do indebt us to the people who will get them in the future. Right? Because
Mm,
what you do with an inheritance is you pass it down. It goes down through the generations, right? So we get these things from the past, and they compel, um, or they create certain responsibilities to the future.
mm.
And that flow of like giving and receiving from past to futures puts the past in the future, right? And puts the futures in the past.
Yeah,
So
absolutely. Yes.
yeah, so you end up with this undoing of this linear progress of time that we're so used to.
Yeah, it's an eternal doing, undoing. It's a kind of becoming that is, um, it's certainly not linear. I like that a lot. And to me, there is something about the ghost almost as a tour guide. The ghost shows us or points in directions, because the function of memory, cultural data set, and if we look at it, that's a key tool in wayfinding. To me, then how do we navigate the ruins of the future is a very important element, because the ruins are around us. Where do they come from? Well, they come from the past, but we are, in a sense, carrying them into the future culturally, but also individually. Let's say social structures. What do I think about monogamy as opposed to polyamory or something? We don't live in a polyamorous society at the moment. It's taboo. Whereas other cultures have happily lived in polyamorous societies and flourished and so on. So we could say that about capitalism. Capitalism comes from an 18th and 19th century vision of social order and flourishing and thriving. But we now see that it's failed. There are benefits. You and I are talking on Zoom and so on, and certainly we don't have the debt collector at the door. But even so, we know that overall capitalism has failed because it hasn't equitably distributed the resources that we have accumulated over time and released in a sense. So, which is an inheritance issue, right? What do you think about that?
Mm. Yeah, it occurs to me that like when we think about these big structures like, capitalism or monogamy, um, or anything at all, really, sometimes they work at one point or another and then they cease working.
Yeah.
And I think so often when when I talk to like people in the general public about futures, you so often get visions that are utopian
Mm-hmm.
or, increasingly dystopian.
Yeah.
But what those two, that they seem very different, but what they both have in common is that the future is static. It's like, okay, we're heading towards this endpoint, and that endpoint is a socialist utopia, or it's a zombie apocalypse, or it's this, or it's that, right?
Yeah.
Um, and there's no sense that there's a future for that future, right?
Yeah.
Um,
It's interesting. Yeah.
yeah. So I think we kind of end up in these situations where we often think about time as almost like a series of objects, right? Like like it's kind of blocked, right?
Mm-hmm.
And there's a final block that we're heading towards. But it's more liquid than that. And things flow in and out of our pasts and futures all the time and our presents.
Yeah. Yeah. Which is a beautiful way of, I think, describing the locus of all those things as the body, situating the locus of all those processes, flows, you might say, as the body. And, that's, I want to return to the mini museum of the future, okay? Because it's a very clever way of linking the material culture in which we all are embedded, and that's important. And then it links the materiality of that culture to the narratives that surround that. And it invites people to play with materials in order to capture in I would say, a poetic form, some element of a future preview where the future folds back through you, through me, and we all come up with a little window. I'd love you to hear what you think about that, and also maybe what you think about that through the lens of your own creative writing work, because to me, when we heard the people talking and giving their little window spiels, it's the artist spiel. If you've been to an artist opening or art opening, should I say, exhibition, the artist will get up and give a spiel. This is the sort of thing that I'm seeking to do. And of course, you might be looking at the work and think, I don't see that at all. I see it like this. So we've always got counter narratives flourishing. So I'd be interested to hear how you think about all of that, because then I'm going to drag Amanda and Claire back here as well, and we'll have a three-way or four-way, because I can't stop adding my thoughts, but we'll have a discussion about all of that.
Yeah, it's funny. I really enjoyed doing mini museums of the futures. Um, but I went about it in the kind of William James order of things, I guess. Amanda and Claire, introduced the activity, and they're like, okay, you're going to make something which will be in a museum of a future, and maybe expresses something about that time,
Mm.
or it represents a significant moment in that future's past. And I kind of I heard that and I was like, oh, that's a cool idea. And then I sat down with the materials, and it was day 2 of the conference, and I was in that kind of conference fog where my brain was
All
just like,
zombies, yes.
yeah, it just had so much in it, and I needed more coffee, and I was like, oh, I'm tired. And I couldn't, I was struggling to kind of think of a narrative.
Mm.
And I thought to myself, you know what, just dive in and do it. So I started making, and I went through like a bunch of different phases. Like I tried different materials.
Mhm.
I ripped this and I scrunched that, and I got some clay and rolled it into a little ball, and I drew with a texture, and I did a whole bunch of
Yeah.
stuff. And I ended up cobbling something together. Um, and I was like, oh, that's fun. And then I kind of handed it into the museum show. Um, Not kind of anticipating that we'd be invited to share our thoughts. And then they did it. They were like, oh, who wants to, come talk about your artwork? And I was like, oh no, I forgot to explain what's actually going on in my artwork. Like I don't have a story for it.
Mm.
Um, and I was kind of sitting there hearing people share their stories, and I was like, oh, these are all so good, all these wonderful insights. I was like, what am I going to do?
I
And I
love
just,
it.
I know, and I just kind of started like, as I was listening, like half listening, but also having a little panic, like, what story am I going to tell? Um, and then I was invited to share, and I did, and I just kind of threw out a few keywords that had passed through my brain. And then afterwards, I stopped and I thought about what I'd shared, and I was like, no, I think that makes sense. So I
Mm.
kind of
Yeah,
I did the art first, and then I came up with the narrative for it afterwards. And
that's right. You cried first, and then you thought, "Oh, I'm sad."
yeah, yeah.
I love that.
Um, and in the moment, I had a panic because I was like, I did this in the wrong order. Like I did it wrong, right? I was a bad student. I was naughty. Um,
Okay.
but afterwards, I was like, no, I actually like it. Even though I went about the process in the way that I did, I still got something that was useful and insightful. Like I still got
Mm.
something out of it. Um, so
I think
yeah.
that's fabulous. And I'll tell you. two things. One, I did the same thing. I always do before I think. I can't help myself. It's maybe I've often thought, well, am I ADHD or whatever? But I always seem to. But then, that's where your spectre comes in, because we're not doing in a vacuum. We've given material and we respond to it, and then we think, what's happening here? So on my one, I'd done a little doodly thing before I even started, just a little sort of spiral type motif. And then after I let my hands work, and I love clay, so I played with this little bit of clay. And as you know, I made a little snail. And and then I thought, this is slow futures. So I started projecting onto it, because I remembered a bit more of what they'd said than obviously you did. So I was thinking, yeah, we had to have some sort of story here. So I wrote slow futures on the side of it or whatever. But that's, I think, a very natural thing, because I've seen people in all sorts of art workshops, and I've grown up surrounded by art, and I used to do art with kids all the time. Their hands would just be doing stuff, and it would be an adult do the same thing. Like that lovely workshop you attended with me with Marguerite Westacott ran, and this stuff just emerges, and then we provide some kind of narrative, which is very much the Runier thing, as well as the William James thing. I think that's important. So the Museum of the Future becomes a multifocal point, because you held up this guy, okay, and you went blah, 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 blah. I can't remember what you said, but you held it up, and then we had them all there in this beautiful sort of pyramidal sort of arrangement. And I'll put some photos at the end of the thing, this recording, to illustrate that. But people were all giving their own narratives, and Claire and Amanda were sitting there gobsmacked. They were amazed at all these beautiful little, almost poetic reflections on this. And of course, if we'd been asked to talk about somebody else's piece, that would have been an interesting extension exercise. So you give me this one, and you got my snail, and so on, and we would generate a narrative. But the point is that it's futures focused. In some way, the hook is aspirational. It's where do we want to be, or it's premonitionary. Oh, we don't want to go there, or whatever. So I think there's all sorts of layers going on when we do embodied being, sensing, wayfinding, thinking, feeling, and so on.
Yeah. And I kind of designed Ouija Futures the same way, where we did the Ouija work first and got a bunch of strange messages from the board, and then afterwards we did the work of coming up with possible interpretations, like what might these messages mean.
Yep, exactly. So I think this is probably, we're getting very close to sort of wrapping this up here. We're going to, as I said, you and Claire and Amanda can come together and have a good yarn, and I'll try and keep as quiet as I can, because I really want to hear what you all have to say and how you come together and how you engage. Is there anything you want to add before we close?
No, I think this is good for now. I might I've got some thoughts in my brain, but I might save them for Amanda and Claire.
You can sit down and do a collage with your thoughts in your brain, knowing that your thoughts, something must have already happened for the thought to be there. If we work on that premise that the action or the body sensorial sort of flows, then you've got the thought. I think that's worth thinking about in a feeling sort of way. Maybe we should dance it. That was really good, Caitlin. Thank you very much.
Oh, thank you. It's so nice to have a chat with you.
Yeah, no,
Always.
it's always great, and we're lucky enough to be able to do it a bit, but we never do it enough, I think. So we've got to hatch more plots to do things together, and that's of course what I'm also saying to Claire and Amanda. There's the co-creativity is so much more fulfilling, I think, emotionally, spiritually, than, you know, individual soloists. You know, we've got soloists out there, but you know, they often get lost ultimately. Even the cleverest of them, I don't know, a Steve Jobs or something, who would sort of pyramidize the energies, and of course he could give it some kind of focus and articulate it. But yeah, and of course he did some amazing things, but I like the participatory. Yes. Thank you, and we'll wrap it up.
Sounds good. I'll see you next time.